Welcome to Fans of the Forge. This is our wrap-up for Forge and Fire Season 6, Episode 11, Battle of the Branches Tournament, Part 2, the Air Force.
All right.
So let's get right down to business. First, I'm Chris. To my left we have...
It's Sean.
And to my right we have...
Teresa.
And our contestants are Mike Andriaco, who had 21 years of service, Darren Tolley with 20 years of service, Matt Pernis with 15 years of service, and Joe Stickle with over 26 years of service. So, moving on to round one. These contestants had to make the Bolo, which was named after Operation Bolo, which was one of the Air Force's most strategic campaigns. It's a Filipino farming tool that was also used for warfare. The blade length had to be between 9 and 11 inches, include a full tang, overall length not to exceed 22 inches, and they must have a San Mai construction made from helicopter rotor nuts and a 1-inch W1 round stock. So...
Now, hold on.
Yes.
So the blade had to be between 9 and 11 inches, and overall not to exceed 22 inches. So are you telling me you could have the handle be 11 inches?
You could have a handle be 11 inches long.
WTF. Like, what? That's insane.
Yeah, that would be pretty crazy, because you're talking,
It's like a two-handed weapon.
Yeah, you could definitely have two hands
But it was
on
for
there.
farming, so sometimes maybe you want to.
I suppose,
you're chopping
but
trees with that shit. Yeah, you.
but like their sample weapon it's always like a one-handed thing.
Yeah, it is.
So it's just, and this isn't the first time I've had those type of parameters. So it's just sometimes seems a little silly.
Yeah, definitely is. And Sean, you brought up a good point when we were talking about this before recording. The first episode of this tournament, those guys just had to use some bar stock.
They got some bar stock, plain simple.
And it
no
was
frills.
discussed because the challenge of the blade that they were making, they didn't want to overtax it with giving
Yes.
some complicated way of getting their metal.
Right.
So because this is a less complicated blade, these guys now have to do a San Mai construction using ridiculous giant helicopter rotor nuts.
Yes, in which construction I'm still unsure of. It was a gear with a bolt running through it that you couldn't just extract easily from it.
You couldn't cut through it with the torch. You had to go to the chop saw.
Yeah,
or if you hammered the fucking thing off.
I really don't know what the hell how it was constructed, where you actually had to pull from it. I just gave up trying to figure it out, and it's just like, all right, well, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, and even then, like, some of them pulled very little pieces of metal off of that thing to use.
It still didn't make sense.
And Dave Baker's like, it's enough.
It's like, yeah, that's enough. I'm like,
that's enough.
How is that enough?
Dave Baker.
I still don't understand.
So, for Mike, he started by cutting the nut into pieces, but he couldn't get the angle grinder to do the job that he needed. So he moved on to hot cutting, which mostly works, but he still couldn't quite get there, so he had to go back to using the angle grinder to finish it. And then once he had his billets drawn out, he tack welds the stack to do his San Mai. And he just kept moving right along. They didn't really give him much airtime until it was time for him to do the quench. His blade, when he quenched it, was extremely hot.
Yeah.
Possibly the temperature of the sun.
Right.
Thanks, Will Willis. Was that Will Willis?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Thanks, Will Willis.
Yeah, good job, buddy.
With your jokes. And then Darren, he attempted to use the oxyacetylene torch to cut the nut into smaller pieces, but it did not work. It just basically heated the nut up, and it was a heat sink. He couldn't cut through it. It was just sucking all the heat into the center of it.
Well, was he the one that didn't know how to use the torch?
I think so.
Oh, is that what happened? He was just...
I don't know if that's what happened, but that's a part of
that
what
was
happened.
part of it. He didn't know how to... I think that was his first time using one, and he didn't know how to set it up properly.
That's right.
So it wasn't really cutting. And Baker even said so. He's like, he's just going to heat it up. He's not going to cut through it the way it was set up.
And then he ends up just sticking the nut in the vise, getting a hammer, and just beating his nut with the hammer, and eventually breaks it off. And he gets this nut about this big, and that's enough metal for the San Mai, apparently. He's having a hard time with his forge weld, with the metal he took off. He couldn't get his layers to stick properly, and he just keeps going at it, and he's trying all these different ways to get it to stick, and really he's heating it. He's overheating his metal at that point, and he's causing all this extra forge scale to form.
Yeah.
It's just not going to stick at that point. So Ben says to Will that he needs to start again, but Darren, of course, cannot hear that. And Darren then pulls the pieces apart, cleans them up, MIG welds around the whole thing. Is this what Ben is saying to do?
That's what Ben was saying to do, was to pull it apart,
Yeah.
clean it up, MIG weld the whole thing, try again.
But
Yeah,
that's
Darren
not
couldn't
what Darren did. Darren goes making a taco style with one of his W1 pieces. And then with 15 minutes left, he's still working on the shaping. And Ben says it looks about 7 inches long. It doesn't look like it's meeting parameters there.
At least that was a 2-inch. Oh, that seems short. Not like, I think I can see a 1/4 of an inch short from way over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
For Matt, the first clip they show of him is him swearing at the nut because it won't fit under the saw.
Right.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
It's like our first impression of this guy is just obscenities and bleeping.
He attempts to heat the nut to hammer off the mild steel. That doesn't work. So he brings it over the chop saw and then cuts off a small piece. He uses the stacking method for his San Mai, but he does not wait long enough for the billet to get hot enough to forge fully together, and he ends up deciding to cut off pieces that weren't sticking properly. And then when he went to quench, the blade did not fully harden on the first quench and goes in for a second heat treat with 4 minutes left, and proceeds to then drop his blade in the oil at the last second. And he's staring at the oil in the...
He dips his finger and he's like, it's too
It's
hot.
too hot, but I kind of have to get it out now or else...
Yeah, with seconds left. He
No one told him
reaches
about
in.
the magnet.
whole arm.
He didn't do it with the magnet. He just went right in.
All in.
All the way up to here on his arm.
Yeah.
It was pretty gross. But he got it out. And then for Joe, he also used the oxy-acetylene torch, but it worked well for him. He was able to
He knew
actually
how
cut
to
with
do
it.
it.
And then he was moving right along. He was ahead of the pack, basically. He was the first to quench out of all of them, but he did pick up a bit of a warp, and he had some time to try the quench again to try to fix that warp. And then he went to grind the bevels and realizes he's got a pretty wicked delamination going on in his blade. But at that point, there was nothing he could do about it. He had to just grind it as is and hope that if he makes it through the round 2, that he could fix it there. So for judging, for Matt, Dave Baker was very excited that Matt was able to submit a blade after struggling so much at the beginning of the round. It looks and feels pretty solid. There's a lot going on in the tang, but something about the curvature of the blade.
He said,
What?
Dave Baker said something about the curvature of the blade that can't be dealt with. And then later on, the curve is in the wrong direction.
Oh, okay.
So if it's supposed to curve this way, his was curving that way.
Right.
Oh, I see.
But you don't find that out until later when he's going to fix it, that they actually explain what the problem was.
Okay. For Joe, he had a good bolo profile, which I didn't mention before. The bolo is a pretty cool looking knife.
Yeah.
I like the rounded tip that they have on there. Seems like a neat style. But he had a good bolo profile,
Nice.
a nice handle shape and size, and his big issues was the delam that traveled at least halfway down the blade, but it could potentially be fixed if he could chase that grind down and get down to the steel beneath it. For Mike, he nailed the shape with some delaminations on the side, and it looks like those delams could be ground away, and Doug had some issues with the handle. And Darren, he had a major problem with the blade right off the bat. It did not meet the parameters. It was 8 3/8 inches from tip to plunge line, and it had to be a minimum of 9 inches.
Yep.
So, because of that, Darren gets the boot. And we move on to round 2.
Okay, round 2. Our smiths are asked to attach a handle, deal with blade flaws, and the handle must include 3 pinholes, a lanyard hole, and an acid etch. Oh, by the way, you only have 2 hours to do all this.
Damn.
So again, it seems more stuff to do
Right.
than in the previous episode.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
So for Matt, he decides to deal with the warp last and flips the blade upside down, grinds what had been the spine into the bolo shape. So he adjusted the curve that was backwards. So
It works.
yeah, I mean, what else are you gonna do? Really. His focus is having a completed knife, and then he's gonna worry about a straight knife, and looks to be making the most of his limited time. As he takes the clamps off the handle, it is seen that he has a little
capsosis.
gapsosis at the ricasso.
Whoa. A gapsosis, huh?
Yeah,
Interesting.
atrocious gapsosis. With 10 minutes left, he clamps it all back together, applies more glue, not mixed with sawdust, as Dave Baker suggested to Will, to fill the gap, and heads to the grinder. For Joe, he starts with the handle so that he can deal with the blade issues while it dries. Does a hollow grind to his blade to take care of the delamination. Spends the last half hour making sure the handle is comfortable, and then sharpens the blade. And remembers right at the end of the 2 hours that he needs to acid etch.
Yeah.
So right up against the clock there. Thankfully he remembered.
Yeah.
Didn't show anyone else doing that, but
No.
Yeah.
for Mike, he went with a tan micarta, ground down the tang first, plans to attach the handle scales and thin down the blade while the handle scales dry, and forgets to incorporate a lanyard hole into his blade scales. Or, I'm sorry, his handle scales. He has it in the tang, though, so the hole is in the tang. He just didn't drill the scales for that hole. So he has to drill through and hopes he hits the right spot, which he does, amazingly.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's really incredible that he was able to nail that. I mean, I guess if you have an idea of where it is, but still, drilling anything, the slightest bit being off, you're screwed, because then it doesn't line up, and then your hole's too big if you try to fix it.
Yeah.
So, good job. Yeah. Luck was with him for that.
All right. So, the strength test. Ben bashes 8 times into flight helmets, a.k.a. brain buckets.
Brain buckets.
So, for Mike, and each helmet had, a little nickname on it. So,
call sign?
Call
Is that
sign.
what that was?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask.
It was the call sign for the
Yeah.
pilot.
Okay.
That's it. So, Mike's helmet has rags on it.
Rags.
And the blade held up really well with no evidence that the edge had seen a helmet. Only major issue is the size of the handle. It was kind of narrow, round, and wanted to roll. For Matt, he got Covey. The edge held up really well. It was still sharp. Issue is the handle. All of the pins have come loose, and the handle is not really glued in place. Joe got Russo, and the blade suffered some chipping. The handle is a good size and dimension.
So, are we missing something with these names? Do you think they're
I don't know.
references to something?
Yeah, that's what my question was. First I thought maybe they spelled a word altogether, but no.
No. I don't know anything.
Maybe it's some sort of pop culture reference that we're missing.
I don't know about that.
Or it's just otherwise. And who named these things? Why would they pick these random ass names for them? Who knows?
Maybe it's just what they found. I don't know.
I mean, these guys don't claim to be pilots, so it's not like it's their call sign, and that would kind of be an insult anyway. if Ben just starts bashing their names like off
Yeah.
an helmet, like
Yeah.
so.
It was kind of funny too. On the Facebook pages, there's been some trash talking going on between the different branches.
Huh.
Isn't there always?
There always is, and the main one for this was, well, I didn't see any chairs up there for the Air Force guys to sit in.
I heard that from
I think
That was what Tyler
first
said
episode,
in
right?
the Army episode.
I think that's what it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Somebody else said
Yeah.
that in the Facebook group. I didn't see any chairs.
Yeah.
Where are the chairs?
they're just jealous because they don't get to fly jets.
I know.
I
That's
mean,
pretty badass.
yeah. So for the sharpness test, Doug cuts across a sugar cane. Now for the previous test, was Joe's the one that had like horrible chipping?
Yeah.
Yeah, his
It was
really bad.
It was bad. It was bad. So I was curious to see how it was going to fare in this test, but we have Mike up first, and his edge cut easily. It was light, fast, and sharp, and it will cut. For Matt, the handle has loosened a lot. A crack has opened up. The blade is strong, sharp, and it will cut.
See, I really thought he was gonna go.
Yeah,
home
me
because
too.
of that. That was like when I saw that, I was like, "There's no way."
Yeah. For Joe, it's missing pieces on the edge, but it's still sharp. He has a good handle, and it will cut.
Yeah,
I was surprised at how
it still cut. It didn't get caught
it
up.
was missing some decent chunks out of that.
Yeah.
edge. But in the end, Joe gets the boot. He had such a large delamination that as he fixed it, the thickness of the blade suffered and incurred the most damage in the strength test.
I don't know if I agree with that. I really feel like the fact that handle was like starting to come off should have been considered a catastrophic failure. I mean, it didn't fully come off. I guess it didn't fully come off, but it seemed like that could have more potential for. Whereas Joe's was still usable. It still cut. Even though it had the chips off, it still worked.
What's the rules of the tests, though? So for the first one, it's not what the blade does to the thing. It's what the thing does to the blade. And Joe basically failed that test.
Okay.
And then with this one, what were the parameters? Does it need to cut? They all cut.
Yeah.
Its ability to cut. So I guess in essence, I don't want to say this test doesn't count because they all cut. Because what if the handle did come off?
It would have
Well,
been
then it
right.
would've been
It's
the failure,
even though you're testing a blade, it's still the function of the knife. So
But it kept its function throughout the
it
test.
It did. So it's yeah.
Yeah, so Joe's gone.
Yeah.
Moving on to round 3, where they made a U.S. Air Force non-commissioned officer sword because, despite having no historical use for swords, the Air Force utilizes ceremonial weapons as a nod to their roots in the Army. Based on the European pillow sword, the NCO is a lightning-fast stabbing weapon that can be unleashed with lethal precision and able hands. Its slick design is the ideal symbol for the Air Force's stealthy, enemy-vanquishing power. So they said about 28 inches long. Later on, you see drawings on the floor. Parameters seem to be 27 to 29 inches long, double-edged, have a ball pommel, and a lobed crossguard. They have 4 days to make the weapon, and by the way, you must also make a scabbard for this sword. Nah, no, you don't.
JK.
Oh, Will Willis.
Yeah.
Oh, you're cracking me up, buddy.
Pile it on. So we head over to Mike's Forge first. Day 1, he makes twist Damascus, which I don't know that we've seen that. Or at least in practice. I know, like, they've heard about it.
Yeah, they haven't shown very much of it, but
So he plans on 48 layers. Doesn't show day 2. Day 3 is quench day. He modifies his heat treat oven to accommodate the length, and it didn't work. So he has to heat treat in the forge, which is harder to keep a consistent temperature along the length of the blade.
yeah, but you got to think about it. That heat treating oven is not pushing heat forward.
Right.
It's pushing heat down.
Yeah.
So it was a good idea, but it's not the same way as a forge. Like you could extend a forge out, and that heat will travel down because of the way that the flame is kind of pushing the
Or
heat.
you can put your whole, slide it in and out
Well,
all the
yeah.
way.
It
You
is
can't
what
do
he
that
was
with the
doing.
heat treat oven,
Right.
Unless you can open up the back, but then it's ineffective anyway because you're losing all your heat.
Yeah.
So after the quench, it's sabered, which means that it bent to one side. He decides to grind it rather than heat treat and quench it again. It's probably smart because bad things happen when they have to do more than one quench.
And we've seen before where you can, if you grind it a certain way, you can cause it to straighten itself back out. Like, not that you're grinding the material to make it straight, but that the heat from the grind ends up pulling the forces back the other way. So, yeah, it could work.
And on day 4, he still needs to finish the pommel and the crossguard, and he hasn't even started the handle yet. So, a lot of work to do on day 4. Matt, day 1, he's using 1084 round stock. He measures 35 inches on the floor to make sure that he has the correct length, plus extra for pommel and guard, which I thought was a good idea. They didn't show day 2. Day 3 is the quench. He picked up a warp, quenched again, and it still had a warp. Decided to just leave it and move on. And then day 4, he still needs to get the crossguard fitted up, the handle shaped and wrapped with wire, and assemble the pommel. Right, so then they go in for testing, which is another ballistics dummy kill test. For Mike's, Doug does his thing. He stops, and then an organ falls out.
Yeah.
Which was...
Yeah, that was pretty good. I find that I noticed in watching these 2 episodes back to back with 2 ballistics dummy kill tests. He doesn't
same test.
No,
he does it the same movement though. He did the same.
No,
movements.
he didn't. He didn't do the shoulder slice like he did in the first one, and he spent way more time swinging into the gut of this one. So and then he only did one swing, not even a swing. He just went sliced at the throat. Whereas for the previous episode, he swung at the throat and so he changes it up.
Okay. So Mike's sword was very light. The tip allows for nice thrusts. The edge slices nicely, and it will kill. For Matt, the edge is very sharp. The point punctures nicely, and it will also kill. The strength test is Ben bashing into a propeller 10 times. So for Mike, he ends up breaking off one of the propeller blades. Mm-hmm. The blade held up great. The only issue is that Ben would like the pommel to be a bit bigger. It's a nice weight and as sharp as at the start. Well done. And then for Matt, his broke off 2 of the propeller blades. The blade held up great. It's still sharp. It's a heavier sword than Mike's, and everything below the crossguard has kind of a problem. The crossguard itself is loose, and the wire wrap around the handle is also loose.
Yeah, that's not good.
For the sharpness test, it's Doug cutting across the parachute harness, which I think was from the Army episode, round 2, that they didn't get to do. Mm-hmm. So they just kind of recycled the test. Okay. And they're looking for clean cuts on these parachute harness cords. Mm-hmm. All right. So for Mike, it was light in flight and sharp enough to cut through the harness. It will cut. It cut all 3 places. And then for Matt, it makes 2 of the 3 cuts. It's heavy on the forward swing, but it will cut overall. And so Matt got the boot. The decision was based on the loose guard, the loose wire wrapping, and the weight of the sword. And therefore, Mike wins the Air Force champion, moving on to the next round.
Congratulations, Mike. And nice work, Matt, on your final weapon and the other smiths. And as we should have said in the first wrap up, thank you all for your service.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And you did a good job. It was a different episode. It didn't seem as exciting maybe as the first episode in the tournament, but it's still, the end came out pretty well. And so otherwise that was that. So we'll be watching next week when they do the next 2 episodes and set everybody up to get into the final, which will be a week after that. And don't forget, we have a giveaway, a breakfast giveaway.
Yeah.
You can get an ostrich egg, throw some beef jerky in there when you scramble that up, and then dump some hot sauce on there.
Beautiful.
Breakfast of champions. And then you can hang a knife banner as well and have a crossbow bolt to go along with it. So there's that. All you have to do to enter that is go to the Instagram page, find the post that says 1,000 subscriber giveaway. Make sure you're following us, Hungerford Blacksmithing and Forge and Feathers, and then just hashtag FOTFGAW on the post. Comment that, and you'll get entered into the contest.
Easy
peasy. Moving on. We will, excuse me, what else? Thanks everybody for following us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. We appreciate all the subscribers and followers. We are at Fans of the Forge on pretty much all of those platforms. And that's that. We will catch up with you next week after the next 2 episodes.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you. We would pay him in friendship, Teresa. That's the compensation.
He gets that for free.
That's the compensation.
Oh.
Or make him a salad or something. I mean,
Vegan pizza.
yeah.
Good?
Yep.
Good.
Sure.
That's the yes we want to hear that you don't mean.
3, 2,